All right, well, thank you for the opportunity to discuss our first United States-European Command-hosted NATO and EU Chiefs of Defense Conference dedicated to countering violent extremist organizations. As you know, terrorism is a trans-regional problem and a clear and present danger to us all, and too frequently there are reports of attacks. Tragically, last week we watched news in Paris where one policeman gave his life in the line of duty and several others were wounded. These officers prevented what could have been a much worse incident, and we're grateful for their sacrifice and their efforts to keep us safe. Contributions of each and every nation's military and government in combating the threats posed by terrorism is truly appreciated. It is only with the dedication and resolve of allies and partners that we can confront and defeat this trans-regional threat. Let me re-emphasize, we are stronger together when we're working together. We must be resolute and adaptable as we maintain momentum together as well. This fight against terror and violent extremists will not be easy, nor will it be fast. It is not a war of choice. It will take resources, determination, and resolve to see the end of terror in Europe. I would also like to publicly thank NATO and EU Chiefs of Defense for participating in these talks today, taking time to strengthen the military bond that we share. The discussions and advice offered was vital to our staffs and our combined efforts. We listened, we learned, we shared, we offered insights, and we came together to work on areas where we can cooperate. We had an honest and candid discussion regarding issues and challenges that we face here in Europe. We discussed ways to strengthen the alliance and discussed a whole-of-government approach, because it's not just the military or police that should combat this threat. Our focus here was to further our shared understanding of the threat, strengthen our partnerships, open new avenues for information sharing, identify opportunities to enhance the military network, and build connectivity between our military network, European intelligence, and law enforcement agencies. As a group, we consistently meet to improve the understanding of each other's issues collectively and individually. This conference was a continuation of Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff Counter-Violent Extremist Conference held last October. This event was tremendously important to Europe as we continue to exchange views on future military cooperation. I feel confident each military and organization that was represented here will continue to work together to support an approach for the common security of Europe. Again, thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk to you today, and I'm ready for your questions. Please.
Andrea Shalal with Reuters. I wanted to ask you two questions. One is, you're talking about improving the way that you share information. What would you say, are there specifics you can give us on how you can improve the flow of information, and what is the cost of not sharing information? And then I just
actually, sharing of information and intelligence is one of the more difficult things when you've got this many nations in a coalition. So the first thing really is what we can do, and we can begin, we've already made strides in, but today helped, is connectivity. What organizations with which nations have entities that already do collection and analysis, and do we have those connected properly? Do they know who they are? Today we had NATO and EU represented, for instance. You know, both have those capabilities. Can we bring their organizations to bear in connection with this greater group of nations in Europe and share information at the speed of relevance, which is really the trick? I think that's one of them. The second one is discuss individual nations' lessons learned, how we have worked, particularly in terms of intelligence, the sharing of intelligence, because nations want to protect, their sources, their methods in some cases. So how do we go about that? And did some of the nations have some techniques that are perhaps, profitable? So those are the kind of things that we talk about. I can tell you, in the year that I've been here, we've made advances in this without a doubt. But it still remains one of the things that we've most got to work on, because if it takes you even a long time to do that sharing, sometimes it's behind the need. Now you asked for an example of that. With this global network, there will be a nation or an organization that has a bit of an intelligence that in and of itself doesn't lead you anyplace, but connected with another country that has information, you now have a way to go, and perhaps even a way to get to the individuals involved in an attack that you know is being planned, but you have no identity or any place to go. And often the case is it doesn't reside in one place, it resides in more than one. So that's the importance of being able to conduct analysis and get the information across this broad network.
I just wanted to ask you, in your capacity as the NATO Supreme Allied Commander, there's been a huge amount of discussion here in Germany about the 2%, and what, every politician I've spoken to in Germany says it's not realistic that Germany is going to reach the 2% level by 2024. And their interpretation of what they agreed to is different than, I think, the U.S. interpretation. How much of a struggle, or how much of a problem is that, and how do you think it needs to be resolved?
Well, I can't respond for Germany at all. I would say that it's important in the sense of the commitment within the alliance, and then within the alliance they'll come to terms with how you, for instance, interpret that. But it's important because we're living in an environment that's changing dramatically. We have challenges that require changes in our posture and our capabilities. And the way to do that, the way to modernize, is going to be, it's not inexpensive. We have to have investment in that. And so the countries, each individually in NATO will come to terms with that investment. It was a 10-year agreement. There's time on this. And there's a portion of that that says it needs to be in modernization as well. So that's an aspect of it. And then some countries will point out that there's a matter of capabilities that you build, and there's a matter of contributions as well that as a whole represents the contribution to the alliance. So, that's an ongoing discussion, and I'm sure we'll get it resolved. Thanks.
Yeah. Peter Baden, Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung. You were talking about enhancing the flow of information. One would have thought that within NATO and the EU, this has happened already. So what's the new quality of exchanging information now?
Well, NATO and EU are organizations, so they do have centers of, operations centers, intelligence centers, etc., that expedite and already have ground rules for how you disseminate information, how you protect pieces of information from other countries. But this coalition is much broader than that. It's 68 nations. It's broader than NATO, than EU. It's global as well, which is what it needs to be to fight a global terrorist network. And so when you open up more countries to it, then you bring another factor into play. So you have to find ways to ensure that you satisfy each of the nation's concerns for security, and you can also move the information quicker. It takes some time to do that. As I said, because of the need and the frequency with which we're now working together, that's coming together, and we're getting better at it. But we still have work to do.
And is it also that it's different information than it was, say, 10 years ago that you're now looking at? Because now you're in counterterrorism and not in something else, military spoken?
Yeah, the nature of the information does make a difference. How you collected it, and certainly today, if you look at 10 years ago, look at the difference in the technical media, cyber, internet, the use of social media by the terrorists, the use of media by the terrorists that requires or is encrypted, for instance. And so there's lots of challenges today that there weren't 10 years ago. And all of that goes, as a part of this intelligence process we had to do, the analysis, and then the conversion of that into useful, information or intelligence.
Andrea Ronhagen, Hessischer Rundfunk. Just a general question from my understanding. When and how does the military get involved in terrorism? Is it just intelligence beforehand, or are there other situations involved?
Actually, that was one of the probably we discussed this topic often as a part of the days of what we did today. Primarily because in almost all locations, the lead is not the military; it's the police It's the judiciary that makes those decisions. That's almost always the case in almost all the countries. And so because of this, we're just a supporting, we're a supporting element to them, and we don't take the lead role. So we talked a good deal about how it's different in each country, who has the lead, what have they learned about techniques and procedures to speed up that relationship, where have we found the military to be most useful in some cases, because each country probably calls on them a little differently, and certainly whatever their situation is in that country. In most countries in Europe, there's an internal threat, but it's a police lead. That's different than say, the nations that within the globe, not here in Europe, that are in Syria, for instance, or a place where there's an active threat, and perhaps the military would take the front step. So that's what we discussed, and it's an important, it's an important distinction. And I think it's interesting to hear how each of the nations address this, because they are all a little bit different.
And is there enough interchange in between the military intelligence and the civil intelligence?
That varies by country too. Some it's a little more difficult than others. I think in most cases the countries said they had a good relationship with the police to the military. It's close and it's developing. Sometimes in some countries there's laws that govern intelligence in the military, information on the civilian side, and when those can be exchanged. And that differs by country. So there's some challenges in that respect. The last thing I'd say was interesting is that within this coalition, you may know that our foreign ministers meet, usually once a year at least. Our defense ministers meet, and the chiefs of defense meet over time throughout a year. We discussed today perhaps the judiciary needing to be an element of this that becomes a part of the coalition, because in many cases they are in fact the lead.
Can
We
you
have
say a
time for
word?
one last question regarding the theme of the conference.
Okay.
I can ask a question about Turkey as one of the sort of gateway countries in terms of foreign fighters transiting through Turkey. I know that the number of foreign fighters has gone down as the fight has changed in Syria, but can you give us an assessment of the kind of risks involved in Turkey in particular, and how there's so much strife in Turkey now, whether you've seen whether you have additional concerns about how the fight against terrorism is going there, given all the internal problems?
Well, I think you pointed to the fact that Turkey's in a location geographically, and given the fight in Syria, etc., they're kind of the nexus of not just ISIS, but they have a PKK terrorist threat within their country. ISIS is in their country. And so they are challenged by all the challenges in Europe simultaneously. They're an important member of NATO. They're an important member of the coalition. And as you stated, they're one of the ways that foreign terrorists move is through that country, one of them. I would just say my experience of late is, working closely with them and watching this, is that they've increased their capabilities in terms of their counterterrorism in country and against the threats in the country. I pay particular attention to that as well because of the force protection of our forces, NATO and U.S. there. And so that relationship's actually improved, and they've shown an increased capacity from my viewpoint here, this past year.
Can you say a word about the radar there, which is such a critical piece of the missile defense component for Europe? Do you feel that that's safe?
Yeah, I do. I would tell you that our forces there are safe. We have a very close working relationship with respect to force protection. I'm confident of that.
Thank you very much, sir.
All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.